All right, welcome back to our YouTube/podcast channel. Today's topic is going to be, do you see and hear what you want to hear in guitar gear? Like how I rhymed that whole thing?
Yeah.
That's because, I have a second career in rhyming. Children's books, maybe writing children's books. But we're going to talk about that subject. We will include the link to the pickup chooser. We're actually not going to give you the spiel for the pickup chooser. If you don't know what it is, click the link below and you'll find out. Yeah. So we're going to dive into this topic. The last video we did turned out longer, and the subject kind of got deeper. I think this one will probably do the same. But so when you go to try something, we're obviously carrying some sort of bias, whether we know it or not. We've had the gear biases topic, but this is kind of like, do you see something, do you hear something in a piece of gear that maybe, I'm not saying it's uninformed, but maybe it's something that you've kind of just got in your head already.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is going to be the best amp I've ever heard. And then you play it and you're like, wow, it's the best amp I've ever heard. Maybe I'm not saying like, don't be disappointed in everything you try, like enjoy what you try, but we're going to dive into that topic. So, you're bringing up the blind test, like the blind, it's not really shootout, but what's the word I'm looking for?
Just kind of like
comparisons, I guess. Yeah.
And I know that there's some popular channels that have really kind of taken off with that kind of idea, but it is like, well, let's see if this import guitar with maybe USA pickups and components and hardware is just as good as the full fat custom shop, artisan, 20-year artisan working on this thing, kind of making it the best that it can be. Is that the same or equal to, just kind of what would be perceived as lesser, especially if you look at it with your eyes and you can tell, oh, look, it says this is made in Indonesia or something. And then this one's made in the USA. So obviously there's a big price difference, but is it really that much different if all of the components are the same pretty much?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that you articulated that really well. And yeah, if you go into a guitar shop and you're looking at the headstocks and you see Epiphone and you see Gibson, that's going to build a case in your head, whether that's a good case, like, oh, I'm not going to waste my money on a Gibson. I'm going to get the Epiphone. Or the others, conversely, it's like, I'm not even going to pick that up. It can't be good, right? You kind of like, we find ourselves dismissing guitars. We were talking about Floyd Rose guitars the other day, how sometimes you look at them and you're like, that can't be good. And it's not the case. It can be great, but do you want that? Like some things kind of like, reach back in the memory banks and be like, oh, well, I can't, guitar colors is another example, right? You've got a Sonic Blue Strat, and some people or Fiesta Red's probably like a color where, I think less people like Fiesta Red than some other colors.
Yeah.
I think it looks great. But some people will not even pick up the guitar. And this could be like the one in terms of playability and sound and feel, but they're just not going to touch it because they have this color bias or they have the headstock bias, the shape of the headstock. If it's a pointy guitar, if it's you think, just as we're talking, I'm thinking of more and more things where you're like, oh, well, I can't, it's like when they started making decent sounding solid state stuff, right? Remember all the tube guys were like, oh, it's never going to be the same. We're modeling stuff or whatever. So we're going to continue the discussion, but we want your comments below. So we're going to throw the comment request out kind of in the middle of this video and just let you guys know. We'd love to hear what you think. What are some biases that you've had? Have you overcome them? Were your biases confirmed? Which is always funny because it's like your own conviction about a Les Paul is different than mine, and it doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm right or vice versa. It's just literally an opinion, right?
Yeah.
But these opinions come and are formed from something. So that's kind of what we're discussing. So let us know what you think about this topic below. So let's get into some specifics. Maybe if you can think of a story that maybe you had a bias, or even if you're willing to go as far as to admit that you have still biases today.
Yeah.
And there's specific things that you're like, I don't know why, but I feel this way about this gear. Anything like popping in your head there?
Well, I definitely have my gear biases, and I'm fully aware of that. And it's funny sometimes, like just in your own practical experience, in those instances, like you said, it kind of like either like erases your bias or it like doubles down, and then you're like, well, this
Mm-hmm.
is definitely true. Like all of the Tom Murphy stuff is just way better than the stuff off the USA line, even though they both say G on the headstock. These are better because it feels like a true vintage instrument. And for that, you also need to have held and played vintage instruments. Hopefully, there's cool guitar shops in your area. But I think for me, the local shop that we've got here, 12 Fret Music. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Rob.
I got a Friedman Telly like a couple years back, and he had 4 Friedman Tellys, and I knew I wanted a Friedman Telly. But ultimately, the one that I thought that I was going to get, which was like a white one with like a gold anodized guard, classic look, I tried it and I thought I was going to like it the most, but it turns out that even a Lake Placid blue one like felt better to me and kind of performed a little bit better. But I think Lake Placid blue is like too blue of a color for me. Obviously, I'm kind of stick to what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
But I ended up going with one that's like Port Orford cedar, and it's got really cool like wood grains. For one, it was the one that played the best, and I was like, well, I'm going to spend the money. I want to get the one that I feel like is the best. And even down to like go into the loud room that he's got into the back and like bringing them all in there. And, it's so awesome that he let me do that. But kind of like shooting out all 3 of them. And I think the 4th one, I kind of strummed it and I was like, yeah, this is for someone else. But so it was between those 3. And the one that I picked had like a fancy wood grain, but that's not necessarily what I like look for. That was just a happy accident. Like the playability and, it's kind of like a blonde color. It's like a natural color. And I think like I like natural guitars more now because of that guitar, but it wasn't the one that I picked with my eyes. That's the one that I picked with my heart and my soul, I
Yeah.
guess. But I was surprised that I didn't think I was going to get that one.
Interesting.
And even then, like I zeroed out the white one and the gold one, and then it was between that one and the blue one, and then just that it had cool wood grain and it played better. I went with the natural one. And it's funny, one of our buddies ended up getting the blue one, and it came into the shop, and I was like, oh, I almost bought that one.
That was my guitar, kind of.
That's
Not
a good
really.
guitar.
Yeah.
But that was one example of my bias recently that you surprise yourself with the things that you pick out if you almost take what you see out of the equation. But I know
Yeah.
that that's super important because we like, with food, people say, oh, you taste with your eyes. And I think that's definitely true with guitar stuff.
Yeah, and that's interesting because if you put yourself in that situation and you had the same 3-4 guitars on a website of a random dealer that you couldn't try, your bias would have probably won the day in picking the one that looked the best, right? Because you didn't get to try them, so you had some kind of like physical evidence to overcome that.
Yeah.
Whatever you were thinking. Like if you walked in, you're probably like, I'm getting a Friedman Telly, and it's going to be that one, and you really wanted to convince yourself it was going to be that one.
Yeah.
But then you took the time, which is I think rare. Sometimes people are, we buy with our eyes, right? We've got the PRS S2 back here. And one thing I really like about the S2s is the top is not, a 10 top. It's not super fancy. It's got the guts and the bones, and it does the job. And I don't need to be seen with a fancier like top. I don't need to, have a semi-hollow, within maybe the PRS world. And I think that was like that guitar is a representation of just a PRS bias that I had. That was very strong. I think because it was associated with like the dad rock and the kind of like blues lawyer kind of guitars, where some of the PRS customers used to work at a music store. Some of the customers actually turned me off because they would just bring their guitars in to brag about how nice the top is and Brazilian and this and that. And I loved it because I was a guitar wood guy, and I'm like, ooh, that's a nice piece of wood. But that wasn't what made me want to buy it. And then I tried a couple duds. And so I kind of like built a case based on those two things. Looking back, it's hilarious to think about. Some legitimate reasons. I tried a few. Like I think I tried a Soap Bar McCarty that was kind of a dead guitar, and I tried a couple other things. But for me to really understand a guitar, I almost need to take it home. I almost need to kind of spend more time with it. I can do it now where I identify something quicker. I'm like, okay, this is great. This is not great. And that's something that, you know, I've gotten better at, of course, with just having your hands on so many different guitars. But in that case, I kind of dismissed them, where the S2s started popping up, and it's like, well, this is like an affordable PRS. I'm not going to drop $5,000 or $10,000 on a private stock. I know that for sure. But this maybe gets me to the USA made level, and then I can kind of see what it's all about. And that actually did that for me really well. So,
Yeah.
so again, another kind of example of maybe a guitar brand bias that was overcome. Even modeling, I think we can all say modeling has come such a long way. So you could say you had a bias, but you're thinking in terms of like the Jelly Bean Line 6 pod maybe versus what Line 6 is doing now, or what Fractal or, you know, Kemper, all these people are doing now that is so much better. I mean, I don't think there's any argument that that's better now than it used to be. We were talking about the whole the industry kind of pushes biases on us in marketing or in videos, and we're talking about the JHS, the Bad Monkey deal, where they made a video about it, and all of a sudden it was valuable and it was cool sounding and all these things where it wasn't to so many people before that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so those are just like a couple random things I think of about biases and you know, guitar color and looks. You know, we've got a cool Ernie Ball Saber in here, and it's like hiding over here somewhere. Just one of our buddies, Derek's, and it's a really really cool guitar. Plays great, feels great. They're quite expensive guitars, and so in my mind, I'm like, well, if I'm going to pay this price, I want the flame top to be showing versus like a solid color, or even if it's a sparkle or fancy. You know, that's, again, maybe that's a bias or just a preference, but you know, I equate like a dollar amount with, like, again, as I just talked about the PRS and how I didn't like that, I'm doing it with another brand.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
do you notice that, right? It's like why do I care about it in this brand and not this brand, even though it's really the same issue, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess maybe you just had more pleasant experiences with the Ernie Ball Music Man stuff, because I remember when I first met you, it was, yeah, like you weren't like a PRS guy, and like I totally get that. Like I've met a lot of guitar players that it's just not their cup of tea, but you know, now we've got 3 of them in the shop and we love them. You know, it's great. We have friends that have nice ones and that we're lucky enough to be able to play them. So yeah, it's just interesting, the parallels. But that you brought up the Saber, it reminds me that I used to kind of like be turned off by green guitars.
Ooh.
But this one, and then the Nova Voltura that I recently had is like a black over a candy apple green. So I think now that bias has been like offset, and now I'm like, maybe I'm a green guitar guy now.
Which, yeah, it's hilarious. Like even your story of growing up kind of, you know, wanting to do Telecasters, but then kind of like, you know, friends were like, why do you want to
Yeah.
play Tellies? Like you wouldn't have seen yourself as a Telly guy growing up. Now you have multiple T style or T inspired guitars
Yeah.
at the very least.
And I think I look for kind of like my tonal archetype is still like a Telly bridge pickup, and I'm just trying to make anything not sound like that, but like respond like that. Like it's a very subtle thing, and it could be a bias that I think I hear, you know, and everyone's like, that just sounds like a guitar, but I'm like, no, but I'm trying to tune the humbucker to make it sound like a Telly bridge pickup, because that just has a specific like feel to it, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, I kind of grew up when I got really serious. Well, I guess I had a PV Predator, and then I had a USA Strat, which is, you've seen it on videos, still floating around here in the shop. So I kind of grew up a Strat guy, if you will. So I was always like, I don't know that I want to get into Telecaster world. I'm not really sure if I think it's me. But every time I play one, I'm like, these are really cool. I wish I would have spent more time on it. I wish I would have played, like, it's like I missed out on an opportunity, but I didn't necessarily, right? I spent more time on the Strat, which doesn't mean I ignored the Telly, but it just didn't fit into the arsenal. But now we've got to try, and we got to play all these different guitars making pickups. If we're making Telly pickups, we better get to know what a Telly is about, what a Les Paul is about, what, you know, PRS, all these things. So we have this weird thing where even if we have biases, we can't have biases in some ways, right? Because we've got to, you know, we've got to have the LP style guitar when maybe I'm not going to go out of my way to buy one but we've got a cool heritage in the shop. And so we want to play that and kind of get to know what that guitar does tonally so we can recommend, a set of pickups. But we've got a couple tellies on the way. We have one coming. There's a fly attacking me here in the studio. We've got an LSL Telecaster coming at some point, and one from our great friends at Mario Martin Guitars, the Honcho model. That's coming soon. So you'll be seeing a lot more of the T-style stuff from us coming up. But any final thoughts as we kind of we're just scratching the surface of this topic. Let us know what you think below if you're still struggling with something. There's nothing that says you have to like undo a bias in the guitar world, right? We're not talking about like social biases or anything else. We're talking about guitars here, so it's not really that big of a deal. If you just don't like pointy guitars, we're not saying you need to go try pointy guitars, but don't discount them at the same time. There's awesome things sitting there. Like our buddy brought in that Japanese ESP guitar.
Yeah.
Like ESP is not typically like a brand I look at. I played that thing and I'm like, holy moly, this thing is awesome. So it's just kind of that whole thing. Like you get into the weeds and you're like, oh no, here's a rabbit hole I'm about to like jump down. So yeah, any final thoughts?
Well, I just think that your story and like the Strat story and it's like how you started there, I think that while it maybe seemed like you missed out or you said not really, but all that did was just like make you a good guitar player to now when you're in your telly moment, you can kind of like fully appreciate them and you already know what you like and what you look for. So it really, to me, it seems like now you're going to enjoy your telly moment even more, And so I guess even if you have a bias and even if you think something is stupid and even if you don't like single coils or even if you don't like humbuckers, it's worth it to your guitar journey to just give it a shot. Like no one has to know. We won't tell anybody.
We won't tell anyone. As long as you buy pickups, we won't tell anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think we just it's good to have, like you mentioned, we have a couple of friends that have a lot different guitar collections than we do, and so that's been really cool. Like, hey, can we try this for a little bit? And obviously we're helping with pickups and stuff like that. So sometimes we'll borrow stuff a little longer. We're full transparency here. Like, oh, we're gonna need another week to make sure everything's set up correctly, because we have a lot of fun when we get something in that we maybe don't see all the time or we don't play all the time, and that's been fun to explore. I think that I have a broader palette of guitar appreciation even in the last couple of years than I did before. It's kind of like when you go to a guitar show and you see new brands and you see these new things, you're like, oh, I want to get into this discovery mode. I don't have the funds to get into the discovery mode to the level I want to, but find some generous friends. We have had stingy friends in the past. You know who you are. But we have had some great generous friends that are like, yeah, borrow whatever you need, man. And likewise, we're kind of like sending our gear off with people and taking stuff in, and that's been really cool to explore. So continue to explore that. Leave your comments below on what you think about this topic. What are some biases that you carry into a music store? What are some biases you carry into, like when you go to your friend's house and be like, oh, I can't believe you have whatever, a Taylor acoustic. Why would you have one of those? Or I'm just picking on a random brand that came to my head, but something like that. So leave your comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching and for listening to the Tonecast. We'll be back with more episodes. Also, if you have suggestions on our YouTube channel or info@porterpickups.com for shows, for interviews, things like that, let us know in the comments.
Yep. Catch you guys next time.
See ya.